Connor McDavid met with the media for the first time since his 3-game suspension for cross-checking Vancouver's Connor Garland was announced. The Oilers' captain spoke after practice on Wednesday.
The league made their decision. I don't necessarily agree with it. I'm not saying that there shouldn't have been any penalty or any suspension or anything like that. Maybe I just, it might be a little bit harsh, but understand their decision and move on.
Connor, did you see that neither referee had his hand up?
I did not. I had my head between my legs, so I didn't see. I didn't see what the ref's reaction was. I mean, obviously, I know where we are in the time of the game and how much, what we're trying to do. And the longer it goes, the more you're thinking there's going to be something. But I understand that the refs have a hard job. And with that being said, my job's hard too. Everyone's got a hard job. That's why we're in this business.
The statistics would show on a game-to-game basis you're not getting as many calls as you had in previous years, even 2 or 3 years ago. Have you noticed a difference in what isn't getting called and what isn't?
It feels like as a team we're drawing less. I'm sure the numbers would say that too, but just from the eye test or the field test, it feels like our team struggles to get power plays. We get maybe two a night, maybe less. So I definitely noticed that this year.
Whether you want this week off or not, you got it. You're like an hour and 20 out there today.
I'd rather be on the ice than sitting at home resting. It's not like I can get a week away in Cabo. So I want to be here to get myself ready to roll when it is time.
Right on. And that leads us to our weekly chat with TSN hockey insider Pierre LeBrun. Pierre, we just heard from Connor McDavid about his suspension. What is your takeaway from what Connor had to say? And I'm curious to get your takeaway about the overall reaction to this suspension, because it has really been quite something how this has resonated after the announcement was made.
Well, I just get my popcorn out and I look at what's going on between the Vancouver and Edmonton markets, both the fan bases, the media groups. I mean, there seems to be a lot going on. And just a reminder, those two teams hate each other and played each other in the playoffs last year and play again Thursday night, Jay.
Yep,
So,
yep.
Yes, the league will be paying attention to that rematch in Edmonton. But, listen, certainly good from McDavid for acknowledging that obviously he should get suspended for what he did. He doesn't think it should be 3 games. I personally don't have a problem with 3 games. What I do agree with the Oilers and with Connor McDavid is that Connor McDavid is not getting enough. He's not drawing enough penalties for the player that he is and for the kind of activity that he creates on the ice. This guy should have drawn more penalties than he has this year. That's legitimate. That's a real thing. That's a fact. And I think it's hard to separate that from the incident itself. But I don't understand anyone that doesn't think that that's not a pretty serious act. And it was just, and so he got a 3-game suspension. He's not that type of player. I don't think we'll see that again. But the other thing I would add, and I'll probably get in trouble for this, Jay, but what the heck, I'm going to say it anyway. Not the worst thing as a byproduct to all this, that other players around the league saw that and understand that if you poke the bear, the 97 bear, something might be coming your way. There are superstars in the past that went into that toolbox, and that's not the worst thing.
Yes, Chris Pronger echoed those sentiments this week. I think he would agree with you. Chris Pronger was, once in a while, would get the stick up, if I recall. Once in a while.
Elbow, stick, yes.
Jets GM Kevin Cheveldayoff spoke to the Winnipeg Free Press about the Jets potentially being in the mix for Jonathan Toews, Winnipeg native, if he decides to return to the NHL. And a lot of talk about the fact that Toews does want to return to the NHL. Pierre, my question for you is a return this season a possibility for Jonathan Toews?
I think it's a remote possibility, and in fact, that interview from Cheveldayoff was with the Free Press and the Athletic, an interesting mid-season update from Kevin Cheveldayoff, and where he acknowledges, as you said, that the Jets would have interest in their Winnipeg native Jonathan Toews, which makes total sense. I just don't think it's going to happen this year. My understanding, in making a few calls on the matter this week, in fact, was that it's way more likely that if he does return, that this is about ramping up for next season, Now, I'm not going to totally close the door on this year because of Jonathan Toews, and everyone who knows Jonathan Toews knows that that dude has the heart of a lion. But from what was explained to me this week, it's way more likely that it's for next year. So, we'll see where it goes. And the interest from the Jets, that wasn't just for public consumption, but it's been expressed to Toews' camp directly already that Winnipeg would like to have that conversation at some point when it's right. But it's also important to underline here that there's still no guarantee we'll see Jonathan Toews again, even though that's what we'd love to see. He's been off the ice for a couple of years. He hasn't played in the NHL for a couple of years. He made his intentions clear in that GQ interview during the holidays that he's probably going to try. But I think we have to be clear here in understanding that that's not a 100% guarantee.
That's absolutely fair. Canucks blew a third period lead to the Buffalo Sabres on Tuesday night. And that was after you guys had your insider trading report about the continuing talks between the Vancouver Canucks and interested parties like the Hurricanes, the Devils, maybe the Dallas Stars, all interested in JT Miller. Do you get the feeling, Pierre, that with each loss for the Canucks, and they've had 9 of their last 12 have been losses, that the pressure to make this deal is ramping up for Patrick Allvin?
Yeah, I think JT Miller gets dealt. I think what everyone involved can't say for sure yet is when exactly. And, those are some of the teams that I mentioned this week, but I believe there's at least a handful of teams that are talking to the Canucks. The Rangers, I don't believe have gone away, by the way, just because that trade didn't happen last weekend. I mean, the Rangers have had a couple of cracks at this, going back to even when all this started 6-7 weeks ago in terms of the Canucks taking calls on JT Miller. So I wouldn't rule out the Rangers either, even though it didn't happen in the moment. But I do think that he is getting dealt at some point because I think they feel they have to at this point. I mean, you could see it from game to game in terms of the body language and where this team is at, why they feel they probably have to move him. And teams are intrigued. I mean, JT Miller, as you saw in the playoffs last year, he absolutely brings it. When he's on his game, and that's why teams are calling. And in terms of the Hurricanes, I think this is more than just a curiosity. I think they really are interested. I think the Devils checked in. I don't know how far the Devils would go on this. The idea maybe of going Hughes, Miller, Hischier down the middle might be pretty enticing. And in general, as you know, I mean, Tom Fitzgerald's on the record saying, just generally speaking, that the Devils are in the market for another center. But I don't know if they'll go all in on Miller. We'll see. But listen, interesting situation. The Canucks are deep in talks. And what I can't give you is a timeline. Hard to say.
In addition to the fine work he does on TSN as a hockey insider, Pierre also writes for The Athletic. And this week, Pierre, you wrote about all the teams in the mix in the Eastern Conference. It's so fun this year. The Habs and Sens, in fact, started Wednesday in those 2 Eastern Conference wildcard spots. Now, it's 6 weeks to the deadline, but that Four Nations face-off break is going to give some teams a little chance maybe to ponder what they want to do at the deadline. So how do you think the teams that are in the mix are going to handle this upcoming trade deadline on March the 7th?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've heard a mixed response on that, Jay. I've heard some teams saying they'd like to get their main move in before the Four Nations, so before the break starts on February 10th. And I get that because there's only 12 days after the Four Nations ends on the 21st to the March 7th deadline, or around then anyway. And I think some teams are nervous that they're going to run out of runway to get those talks where they need to. The problem I have with the theory that we're going to see this mini trade deadline before the Four Nations is that the one impediment on making trades earlier still exists, which is that the later you go in the year, the easier it is because of the cap to make trades. And that's still the case, even though those are the Four Nations. And by the way, it's not like there's a trade freeze during Four Nations. I checked on this just to make sure, but you're allowed to make trades during the Four Nations. It's just that I think teams are planning on treating it like they would an All-Star in the sense that you don't want to overtake league news or a league event with news of your own. So a lot of teams are trying to think about before and after in terms of the Four Nations. I do think you'll see a couple moves before Four Nations. I just don't think there'll be as many as teams want. I still think it's going to be more of a flurry leading up to March 7th, and certainly that's what James Duthie hopes on March 7th itself. But, the other problem with the Eastern Conference being so wide open and so close is that it's really paralyze some teams into not being able to declare themselves as buyers or sellers. I mean, there are some Western Conference contenders that are just waiting for someone to fade in the East, so they can further some of those conversations, but that's not happening right now. Outside of Buffalo, everyone in the East thinks they're still in it, and that has had a negative impact on several trade discussions because people aren't ready to act yet.
Still very excited about the trade deadline. Pierre, I'm excited to see who your Dallas Cowboys hire as a head coach, but they haven't hired one yet. We were going to ask you about that this week. We didn't get a chance to. Do you have any favorites now after a week of deliberating? Kellen Moore, Brian Schottenheimer, Mike Garafolo said, is now in the mix?
Yeah, well, Schottenheimer interviewed, I think, yesterday, and I'm intrigued by him. You know, obviously, you got the lineage. He's been there 3 seasons, a quiet guy from all accounts, from what I'm reading, and knows the offense inside out. He was the offensive coordinator in name, although Mike McCarthy called the plays. I don't know. Sometimes you don't have, the grass isn't greener. Maybe that's the guy. I don't mind that if it ends up being him.
All right. Well, if it is him, we'll be sure to talk to Pierre about that next week. Thanks for this, buddy. We'll chat with you next week.
What do I know? All right. Thanks, Jay.